comment from our friend Jeff Rodriguez, we're done on the defensive line. I mean, and whether or not we are done, I agree with Jeff. But just for the sake of debate, just for the sake of conversation, Ethan, even if we're not done, we're pretty darn close. And the larger point to make here is that like 2025 is going to be the last year in which we say, well, USC doesn't have the bodies up front. I'm like that is the big picture takeaway, that USC is not going to get caught shorthanded, under-resourced next year, because this is how the big boys do it, right? This is how Bama, Ohio State, Texas, like, it's not just having the star ratings, it's having the bulk, it's having the volume, right? Because if a couple guys go down or they don't pan out, you can replenish very readily. You can turn next man up. He's still third, fourth, fifth on the depth chart. Those are high quality additions, hungry players waiting for their turn. Like, this is how Nick Saban and Kirby Smart did it before the NIL and transfer portal era. Someone goes off to the pros or someone gets hurt, we have a big dog third in line, fourth in line. That's how they became so dominant. And so USC is playing in the big leagues at that level for next year's class. Not yet this year, but like this year will mark the end of USC getting caught shorthanded. That really is a great thing to contemplate.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And obviously next year we're going to have those big recruits coming in on the defensive line. But even this year, we've talked about how they're bringing in some more size than they've normally had. And they have Jakeem Stewart, who's kind of the big prospect who everybody's going to have a lot of eyes on in the defensive line, that 5-star. So especially too with the new strength coach, I think that, it's all, they're setting it into motion a little bit this year. And something really interesting that I saw too, I really briefly saw it as I was scrolling through Twitter today, but Chad Bowden was talking to Josh Pate in kind of a one-on-one interview. And he asked him about, this recruiting and how USC has just been able to amass so many, recruits this early in the game, and whether or not that rankings really matter to Bowden. And Chad Bowden's response, I think, was really telling, because he said that he likes recruiting early. And if you look back at, what he's kind of done in the last few years with Notre Dame, he was in a similar spot with Notre Dame at this point in the year. Like, he always had one of the top classes, close to number one overall really early on with Notre Dame. And he said the reason why is because he likes to be a culture. He likes to set the culture as early as possible. He likes to get players in the building, kind of connect them to one another, connect them to the coaches, connect their parents and families to each other, so that, you can kind of start building this vision for what, the USC football team could be before these players even step on campus. And I think that that's, a little bit of what needs to happen this year too. So I'm really glad that he's, kind of setting that vision. And, this year isn't necessarily expected to be the kind of national championship caliber year that next year's, supposed to be, considering how much recruiting we've gotten in. But I think, it's never too early to start rebuilding, especially the culture. USC women's basketball fans will know, like, all too well how much culture matters, and how Lindsey Gottlieb started inputting that as soon as she stepped on campus, even though the talent wasn't there. It's the same situation here. So kind of glad to see that from him as well.
One of the things you mentioned in terms of USC's recruiting wins, I mean, they're coming against other schools where, like, getting a recruit is a victory, is a plus in its own right. But, like, beating UCLA for one recruit and beating Ohio State, like, if you were going to pick a pair of opponents, I think, like, Notre Dame would be the only other one you'd put, like, in the same weight class, or maybe Michigan as well. But, like, beating Ohio State, so that's your national prestige. Beating UCLA, that's your local recruiting war. So being able to score wins, like, any recruiting wins, great, but recruiting wins over those two schools got to feel extra special, Ethan Inman.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, USC has just been kind of completely embarrassing the rest of the Big Ten so far. I mean, not embarrassing. There's other Big Ten schools that are recruiting well, but USC just continues to win seemingly all the most important and the most kind of covered recruiting battles. It's always USC coming out on top, and not Oregon and not um, Ohio State and not UCLA like you mentioned. I think the kind of Talanoa Ely kind of going down to it being USC or UCLA was a really interesting dynamic. I think it was really interesting that he did that because, on one hand, like schools, players don't always like come out and admit that they're down to two schools right before, sometimes it's like 4 or 5, and he narrowed it all the way down to two, but also he narrowed it down to two like hated rivals. So it was interesting. It was, like you really didn't know exactly where he stood because he was, seemingly considering being on either side of the rivalry at that point. But I think it's a little bit credit to UCLA. I think that they've done a better job in recruiting this year than they have in recent years. And it's, really credit to Deshaun Foster. And I think a lot of their fans are really happy with what's going on. Their standards are not as high as USC's, obviously. But, they're making some noise. And I think on like a really broad scale, it's not the worst thing for USC because you want West Coast football to be attractive, and anytime West Coast football is kind of gaining momentum in the national eye, that's somewhat a good thing as long as they're not winning the bigger recruits, which I don't think USC needs to worry about them winning. But it was kind of cool to see that one and see how that played out. It was kind of fun, just and I think I was pretty assured, and so were a lot of people, that he was going to pick USC. I don't think a lot of people thought that there was a real chance that he was going to pick UCLA. So it was more like a, intrigue, like pay attention to which side of the rivalry I end up on. But it was cool. He's he's from the area, and used to play ball in the area before he went out to play in Hawaii. So it was a cool little announcement, and it added a little bit of extra drama, I think. But yeah, and then, like I said, anytime you go head to head with the team that just won the national championship and you get into, a war, whether it's, directly money related, which it seems like this one was pretty financially related, or, just recruiting related otherwise, and you beat them, like, all power to you. That's always good for your program. And like I said, too, this winning these recruits is mattering to other recruits. Like, it's inspiring a lot of them, like Talanoa Ely said, to, they're seeing other top recruits pick USC, and they're like, they're considering USC more heavily. They're like, there must be something to it. And then, they are all kind of inspiring this collective belief in one another that maybe we could win a national championship. And so, all of that kind of collectively is really creating a lot of positive momentum for USC. So all of it's great to see, for sure.
All right. Archer Quick mentions that another recruit committed to Oregon. We all know in our USC shorthand, that's what the zeros mean. The number of national championships, right? So I bring this up just because a year ago we'd be cursing the darkness when Oregon gets a pretty notable recruit. Now, and like Mad Men is my favorite show of all time. I have a lot of favorite shows. Mad Men for me is number one. And I go back to Don Draper with Ginsburg in the elevator. And Don Draper says, I don't think about you at all. That's USC's attitude to Oregon now that everything's changed, right? We don't care about Oregon recruiting, not when we're crushing it, right? Like we're getting so many good players. Hey, Oregon, if you want these table scraps, if you're going to get these other recruits, I don't care about you at all. I mean, the sense of we're getting what we need to get. We're doing what we need to do. I certainly hope everyone in the chat watching here at the Voice of College Football that we're not sweating who Oregon is or isn't getting anymore. Like, that is the beauty of crushing it on the recruiting trail. You don't have to have that anxiety each day, each week. Who's Oregon going to get next? I don't think about you at all. Like, we do not need to, measure ourselves closely against Oregon. We can just say, hey, we're back to being USC. We're back to the gold standard. We're back to, hey, we're doing it the way we're supposed to be doing it. And when we do it the way we are supposed to be doing it, we're good. And it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. We're setting the standard. We're leading the pack. Ethan, it's got to be a great liberation for USC fans to not have to, lose sleep at night about who Dan Lanning's going to get next. We don't care about them at all. Not now, like we did the past few years, because it was a real source of annoyance. And of course, that was a continuation of the Clay Helton era. Clay Helton failing to build the fence around Southern California, going back to Mario Cristobal as well before Dan Lanning. But now we don't have to worry about that sort of thing, or do we?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to, some of the fans in the chat that seem to be a little frustrated with Jet Washington. I mean, this is the nephew of Kobe Bryant and also the number one player that the Ducks have gotten so far. So he's not, it's not a small thing for USC to miss out on him. I mean, he's not a SoCal guy. He's out of Bishop Gorman in Vegas. So it's not, like as big of a miss, but it still hurts a little bit. Like you want to get, anyone who's related to Kobe and you want to keep them in Southern California. And especially, given that he plays the safety position and is just such a high recruit up there. I mean, he's headlining Oregon's class now. It hurts for sure. But I think the grand scheme of what you're saying is still true. I think that USC still has some bigger fish that they're going to kind of rope in this 2026 recruiting class. And so, it's not like this is not as devastating as it would have been in past years. USC not getting Jet Washington. I think especially because they got RJ Sermons in and they're getting him in this year because he reclassified. I think that's also that also softens the blow a little bit because RJ Sermons is very good at football. But yeah, it's still, this recruit is specifically is going to hurt a little bit more than others would have, just because of like I said, the relation to Kobe, and then also the kind of level of talent that he's displayed, and how high his rankings are. But yeah, generally what you're saying is correct. I don't think this hurts as much as in past years, and I think we have some we still have some bigger fish, and our class is already so big too. It doesn't hurt as much as in past years, and it hopefully won't hurt as much. It'll hurt even less down the road when we get some even bigger fish.